Hello, my name is Mr. Davis, and I am here to present some developmentally appropriate practices that I have seen with research work well with fourth graders in the various subjects of math, reading, science, and social studies. So let's go to math first. I have researched some developmentally appropriate practice in math. I have come across word problem notes. I've come across a math survey, which is down here, and then math duels. And I will go into and explain the process behind them. So, in the time that a fourth grader is doing math, they're going to be doing a lot of word problems. So, I would like to make a thought process for them when they are doing their word problems, and this could help them. So they just walk down the steps and then they fill out maybe a chart that I give them of this. So it's understanding. So they need to find out what problem they need to set up first before they start. They need to plan on how they're going to solve it. So what kind of method you would use or they would use, and making sure if they need to draw a picture or estimate or what number, measurements, and then they're going to try to solve the word problem, and then they need to check their answer. They could do it with a partner or by themselves, but it's always good because word problems can get very overwhelming for fourth graders for them to check, because this breaks up word problems into a digestible format, because fourth graders may have trouble reading all that information and using it immediately. So guiding them through that process and the word problems will be helpful. I also would like to take a math survey with my students. So I would ask them various questions regarding math in their life. I used how many bowls of cereal they ate, what kind of sports they played, how many siblings they had, stuff like that. And it's good for me so that I can understand my students better, even so they can get more comfortable with me. This would happen around the first week of school. But this also makes math more applicable to fourth graders. This really puts math in a context that they know. They play sports, or they've seen someone play sports. And, maybe they eat bowls of cereals, or maybe it's a different food item. And some of them have siblings, some of them not. And then putting that in putting that data in a context that they're familiar with, we can work with that data and we can understand it better. And then my final DAP for math is math duels. So this is a practice that is drilling practice. It's behavioristic. I would have them try to answer the quick multiplication facts. It's kind of a multiplication table practice very quickly, but they would be timed. So they would have 2 minutes and they would get a partner. So the first 2 minutes, the one person answers the facts, while the other checks them out and records how many they have answered. And then they switch. And then we'll see how many quick multiplication problems that they would answer in the 2 minutes, and who does more. It's kind of a math duel. No one is losing. That's just a fun, competitive way of practicing those tables, which are very crucial for fourth graders to get, so they can do higher end multiplication. And I could do that. You could do this with division as well. I like to use math as sometimes making those boring, tedious drill parts of math as something that is more of a game, or they seem like a game, and that could be a way that play is integrated into math that I like to use. So technology is implemented for me with it using the survey where I'd send it out online and their parents would help them fill out. This would establish a communication base with parents, which is very crucial as a teacher, so it helps. Families are supported with the survey that I send out and them helping their students in order to answer the survey, and also helping them practice. I'd encourage the families to practice with their students so they can get better at math rules, because the math rules numbers will be recorded. I'm going to move on now to science. I have learned a few general things that I would like to apply to science. So science for me helps with the practices if I use inquiry-based learning with the science, with achievable discoveries. When students are first learning how to do inquiry-based learning, I don't want to discourage them. So making sure that the progress is not being hindered, like they can achieve it. Knowing my students' limits, but that they do not get discouraged while trying to learn. So my next practice will be having conduct science, the scientific process, through hands-on, observable, and physical environments. It's very hard for fourth graders to take starting things from the abstract area of, for example, you take measurement, which is really crucial in science, and they have to work out a measurement problem on paper. Well, it would be better for them to start out physically measuring something and actually looking with their hands and figuring out how much liquid this is, or how long something is with metric or imperial. So making sure that the environments are physical will help support the learning. And finally, I'd let my students pick a subject that they care about in the realm of science, and I want them to be able to experiment or research through various resources. Because science is a very wide field. It has, biology, chemistry, physics, and many different domains from those, like inside of those. So it's as an activity that lets students know why science is, and getting them excited about it. Because I was, when I was their age, that I was excited about different science than maybe I was excited about now. So I just wanted to excite their curiosity through science, and distill practices, fundamental scientific principles. So there's a lot of variety of tools that can be used in science. There's a lot of grades, introductions, various games online that will be able to let a student explore, maybe on a computer. Or maybe there's a variety of tools that they could help online that could help students with measuring practice, or different videos of different wildlife. Like, there's an endless amount of ways that technology can be incorporated into science. And I just think of play, when it's integrated in science, is the newness and fun of discovery. When the student's able to discover things in a way that, on their own terms, they'll have fun with it. And of course, it has to be organized, but I think we lose sometimes the joy of discovery and teaching. Sometimes, at least remembering my school experiences when I was younger. So families are encouraged and integrated into scientific practice through making sure to encourage their students for asking questions, being able to develop their curiosity of science, and not being afraid to shy away from that. And science can be a public thing, and having students' works shown off at a science fair is a great way for families to get involved, maybe in helping the science fair, or just observing how hard the students have worked in the area of science in a classroom. We're going to go on to reading. In reading, we have the practice of a book club. We do some spoof fairy tales or re-dramatizations of fictional stories, and then we do dramatization or acting out of fictional stories. So a book club is basically a way for students to socially talk about what they're reading and to get a full grasp on understanding of course, the base plot and context of a book, but also kind of what the theme and what the purpose of the author was trying to write. So this requires, I would like to do small groups of students, so, depending on class sizes, 3 to 5 groups, that will have a book that I will probably start choosing for them, but it really depends on your class if you're thinking about choosing a book for them or letting them choose a book. It really depends on the student level and if they are familiar with book clubs, and showing them the process of that, how it works. So first you have to show them how a process of that book club is worked and being framed to have a discussion about something that you read together as a class, and talking about maybe why the author put that there and what really stood out for them in the book. And then they would be able to get together after they have read, maybe either, depending on how long the book is, all of the book or maybe a section of the book. And they would get together and they would discuss about what stood out, what are some themes, what inferences they drew from the text. So this would help students practice speaking and listening skills, which is really important for students at this age. And this will also just hammer in basic concepts of reading, like plot, setting, characters, all that kind of stuff, inside the context of the book club. While the students are meeting, they will be monitored on and off by a teacher. The teacher will go around and make sure that discussions are happening that are fruitful. After the discussion happens, teachers will ask students to develop a new goal for their next meeting, so that they first reflect on what they've discussed, and then they will come up with a new goal so that they become a better reader or a better member of this book club. So the next concept or next practice that I like to use is this concept of a spoof fairy tale. This could also work with different narratives depending on what material you work with. But it's really easier for me to explain it in the context of a fairy tale. So, traditional literature has these tropes that are attached with it that are very easy to manipulate. So, typically the villain's really just bad. Just purely bad, nothing else. The hero's good. There's not that much characterization, for example, and there's a lot of action in fairy tale. So you really typically experience a fairy tale from the protagonist's perspective, but this would change the idea and write from a different perspective. This would help with their understanding of if you're doing it with traditional literature, but this could also help depending on whatever genre you're doing it with. And you could pick maybe writing it from, they could write from a villain's perspective, or antagonist perspective as well. Or they could write it from a supporting character that helps in the fairy tale. This will touch on comparing and contrasting points of views from which stories are narrated as a common core thing that's dealing with 4th grade. So it's a great way for students to develop perspective and really nail point of view depending on what type of genre you do. Finally, you have the dramatization of stories. This could include reader's theater, but this is basically acting and putting action to whatever 4th graders are reading. So this would take a while if you're doing this, but I'd like to include it, sometime in my grade. So 4th graders are generally very verbal. They like to express themselves through their words and actions. So it will develop student motivation when they're able to act out the story. And there's plenty of scripts online for teachers to look up that they can do a reader's theater format, or they could do something more complicated and do a sort of play style with memorization of lines. It really depends on the level of class, but any kind of dramatization will be super beneficial for 4th graders. Play is integrated in the reading practice with the use of dramatic play. This will help them develop emotional perspective and have fun doing it. Technology, there's a lot of resources. For example, when we're writing spoof fairy tales, there's a lot of flipped perspectives. I like the author John Cheska. He did one over the 3 Little Pigs, but from the wolf's perspective. There's a lot of other YouTube videos that have animations that show those videos of the flip fairy tales, or just even the regular ones. Tons of different videos reading a wide variety of literature. So, and also there's resources of showing how students are supposed to work inside a book club. And it really helps me, and it helps students when they see other students conducting a book club very successfully. And there's a lot of videos that will show that, so that they can learn. So, families are promoted when students can go home and talk about what they've learned in their book club and what they've discussed and what they are reading, so that they can help them take notes correctly and understand literature and read with them. They could also help in community involvement with dramatization when students maybe are doing a reader's theater, or they're just doing a kind of class type play with text specific. Parents could watch and support, or if they get really ambitious, or maybe ask them, they could help provide, sets or props like that. The amount of parent involvement could really be endless. Finally, I'm on my social studies practices. So, my social studies practices are the use of essential and driving questions, the use of including primary sources with your teaching, and then taking informed civic action. And I'll go over them. So, basically, An essential question is a question that intrigues students' learning and drives learning of social studies units, where it is not just a here's some facts that we read in the history book or text, and it's something that reaches much bigger than that. It's not just a recall what you read or what the teacher has read. So they're able to stimulate larger thought and make meaningful connections and with prior knowledge. So they could address very, very important issues today, like maybe something like a climate crisis and what we're doing to change that and how the history behind it. That's just one example, but this really boosts the fourth graders' comprehension of what you are teaching because it gets them more emotionally invested because of the use of an essential question that guides what you're teaching for that unit or block of time. So another great resource that I like to do technically is a primary source. So primary sources are basically anything that comes from people who observed history directly. So this could be a video of a speech. This could be a picture of a school. Or just even a law or a specific document. There's a wide variety of primary sources that teachers can use. And thank goodness for the internet. We'll get back to that later. So there's a lot of wide variety of resources, and it's important as a teacher to have a careful eye when you're picking out primary sources, because history isn't black or white, as I said. It all depends on who wrote it, who done it, and why did they say that. So we're gonna go and move on to informed civic action. So at the end of the C3 social studies framework, which is a framework teachers use today to help guide their social studies teaching to become, better lessons. It requires students to take informed civic action. So students will be able to gather a deeper understanding of whatever you ask them to do. And then they'll have to take an active role as a citizen. So, I used, for example, students were doing an inquiry-based project in the civil rights unit, and they're learning about, the history of civil rights at an appropriate fourth grade level. Obviously, some things have to be, tailored to their age, but students could, for example, could write to their local government about, raising awareness of partial discrimination, maybe because of poverty, for example, and maybe what they provide. So, for example, knowing that some areas typically get less support because of, unfortunately, how someone is or what kind of race they are. And, writing about that to the local government could be a way to take informed civic action. So, when they take informed civic action, they feel like they're actually impacting something. They're seeing a bigger picture, because this is about the age that they start seeing a bigger picture, and seeing the world as it's not perfect. It has some flaws, and when they take informed civic action, it gives them the power in their mind, and it really does give them that power right now to be able to change the world for the better. And that's really what the point of social studies is to empower them to not feel helpless and to see a problem and be able to help fix it. And to gather a greater empathy for everyone around them. Even taking informed action on, for example, someone who's maybe homeless. Maybe they'll raise enough money around Christmas holiday time, and they learned about maybe the historic poverty in this area, and they want to raise money for people who cannot afford winter coats. So maybe they'll help raise money for that, or even somebody in their class who needs it. So play can be integrated in social studies through interactive lessons. So students these days will not like sitting at desks for hours and hours on end. I don't like sitting at desks for hours and hours. I just can't do that. And it's important for them to get involved in their history. So one way to help that is by acting it out. If there's an important event in history, why not act it out that they're supposed to be learning about? This makes it learning more important to them. Obviously, they have to act it out with a critical lens, and developing that is very crucial. There's also tons of experiences, games online that could be primers, or even for their free time, about learning about history. If they can take role as a pioneer and trying to get across the Oregon Trail, for example, like that's another way to just, as a fun, gamified way to implement social studies. And I'm not saying that replaces the core teaching, that's just an added benefit. So the internet is really great for social studies because there's a wide variety of sources, a lot of primary sources now for teachers to use in their social studies teaching. There's videos, there's files, like audio files, audio logs, there's speeches, there's journal entries. There's like state scanned articles that are primary sources for like most every state that teachers can use that are on the internet. And that's what makes great about the internet today as a teacher, is you can use all that resources to make it very interesting. Also, there's people that obviously know more than average teacher because the average teacher has so much to learn about. But inviting an expert, for example, to come in and teach. If they cannot teach, then they can maybe receive a video call and they can call the class and discuss questions that students will have, maybe if they're in a project-based learning activity. Families are supported in social studies when they embrace their heritage and their diversity. Students should be proud of where they came from and they should be taught to understand who they are and embrace it. And being able to research using their own families who they are is very powerful, and I think is a great way to implement social studies inside a family context. Well, that has been all for me today. Thank you so much for listening to my appropriate practice.